Hi everybody, good morning. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. And I'm really honored and happy to get to follow Pete after his talk on SWI because we're gonna this morning take a little bit of an even deeper dive into the neuroscience of reading, essentially, and kind of take a look inside the reading brain. So there's going to be aspects of this presentation that really dovetail nicely with what Pete was talking about. So cool. Let's see here. A little bit about me. I have been practicing for 18 years. I did my graduate training in Los Angeles and my clinical work at UCLA and University of Chicago, Medical College of Wisconsin. And an important point about where I'm coming from in this talk as a neuropsychologist is that all of my training and the first 12 years of my career was in the field of epilepsy. And the reason that is relevant is because my educational background and professional background was really steeped in the brain behavior relationship. And so neuropsychologists do assessments and evaluations and diagnosis, and we have this extensive training and experience in understanding what's happening up here that creates this. Whether it's language or movement or emotion or attention, and kind of mapping those things out in the brain. Are you with me? Okay. So today we're going to focus on the brain and reading. Cool, cool? Love it? All right. So, and I'm going to just preface this by saying that this is a deep dive. So it's like, this is like Dyslexia 301 or something, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna bypass a lot of the basic definition stuff and really just dig in deep. If you guys have questions, stop me. I love a good interactive audience, okay? So don't be afraid to raise your hand. And also bear with me because it's complex material. And I just want to make sure that you all have a good understanding of things as we're going through, okay? So the likelihood is if you have a question, somebody else does, so chime in. Cool?
Why did you switch from epilepsy to dyslexia?
Well, good question. Why did I switch from epilepsy to dyslexia? It was a hard thing because I loved my work in epilepsy. What I learned, okay, there's a long answer and a short answer. I'll do the short one. But what I learned was that many neuropsychologists don't understand dyslexia, which is bizarre but true. And I wanted to get out into the world. So epilepsy is a very niche field, which is why it's cool and kind of sexy to be in, in neuropsychology. But it is a very niche field. It was, kind of less than 1% of the population, and I wanted to get out into the larger world and do more public education on this topic, brain behavior stuff. Cool? Thanks for asking. Okay, so we're going to talk about briefly reading, dyslexia. And we're going to talk extensively about neuroscience. We're going to talk about heritability and genetics. And then strengths and support. I'm going to focus my strengths and support on the neuropsychology, the brain behavior of why those things work. All right, so starting off my talk with a quote from one of my favorite researchers and teachers in the field of dyslexia, Marianne Wolf. Her book, Proust and the Squid, is my all-time favorite book on dyslexia. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. Dr. Wolf says, a cultural invention like reading is only one expression of the brain's phenomenal potential. And I start with this quote because I want us all to kind of take a step outside of ourselves and outside of this moment in time and know that human beings haven't really been reading for that long. We're kind of like fish in water right now because the only thing that we know in generations past was this reading world, right? But really it's a little bit of a newish kind of thing, a newish phenomenon, right? And it's a cultural invention, right? Culture invents this code, this written language code that allows us to communicate with each other and facilitates this process, right? What we know is that no human brain is born hardwired for reading, which comes as a surprise to all of us who are fish in water and kind of assume that we just are born with this. But no, still to this day, no human brain is born with a wire. So what happens is the brain has to like re-specialize itself. Okay, so it has to take the elements that it's kind of like evolved to develop and then re-specialize, because we keep giving it this thing to do over and over again, and so it's like, oh gosh, okay, well I guess if I have to do this like every single day, I better like get good at it, right? So that's kind of what the brain ends up doing, okay? And and this is crucial for where we're going in the brain stuff. What the brain is evolved and hardwired to do is two things: object recognition and oral language. Okay, hunting and gathering, and verbal communication, sharing stories, right? And what ends up happening is those two parts of the brain, which is in the back left and behind the left ear, start to re-specialize parts of themselves. It's like if you're running a business, you develop a department all of a sudden because you're doing this other thing a lot and you want to get quick at it, right? And so those regions of the brain develop these subspecialty areas that then get programmed to become automatic at reading. Are you with me? Okay, so that is kind of where we're going. Hollis Scarborough, I hope that you're all familiar with this reading rope, but just as a refresher, or if you're not familiar yet, reading, skilled reading at the end of the day comes from these two kind of sections of rope, each of which have several strands, but the broad sections are language comprehension and word recognition, okay? And it's only when language comprehension, which is like vocabulary and verbal reasoning and background fund of knowledge and things like that, it's only when that starts to kind of be able to interface with this word recognition that skilled reading happens. And we see a lot of readers in our world of dyslexia who actually get really good at this piece of things almost as a compensatory way, and we're not able to see that they're struggling with the actual decoding, phonological processing aspects of reading. Okay, so this is an old kind of model, but it's important to start from this point. Today we're going to be focusing on this aspect of things. Okay. All right. So broadly speaking, dyslexia is a brain processing difference, or as I say when I'm describing to kids, a built-in brain wiring difference, which we'll talk about more. That has usually a genetic origin, which we're going to dig into deep, and I'm excited to get into that with you guys, that results in inefficiencies in phonological processing and rapid automatic naming, and then impedes the efficiency of reading. So these bullets are like kind of almost chronological of how it happens, right? Built-in brain wiring difference that has a genetic origin that creates these inefficiencies in phonological processing and rapid naming. Those are two separate important things. And then impedes the efficiency of reading. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Dyslexia is not a visual problem. It's not untreatable. It's not an indicator of low IQ. It's not an indicator of overall or other learning problems. It can co-occur with other learning differences, but doesn't always. And it's not something to hide or be ashamed of, okay? Lots more to say on that, but that's the overview. Briefly, just to make sure we get this point across, and this is, I'm so glad you're here. So following up, I was just saying at the beginning that like dovetailing from your talk, we're gonna have a lot of interplay here. So yeah, dyslexia is primarily a language network problem. It's not a visual problem. It's a disorder of phonological processing as a subcategory of language, which we all know because we just learned this morning, right? But dyslexia does not reflect an overall language deficit, rather a localized weakness within a specific component of the system, which is the phonological module. So the phoneme as the most basic element of language, or the individual sounds that then builds into semantics, or and morphology, that meaning, syntax, and then discourse or conversation. All right, so I wanted to rush through all those so that we get to this stuff. Go for it.
Why do so many people think it is a visual problem?
That's a great question. There are elements of, first of all, because when we read, we use our eyes to see the letters on the page. Also, there is a phenomenon of letter reversals, which I'm going to talk about in maybe a deeper detail than maybe other. But the phenomenon of letter reversals can make it seem like it's a visual problem. It's not that vision isn't involved in reading. It's more about the translation of the symbol that gets processed actually in the visual part of the brain, but it's more about the connection to the language part of the brain. It's not about the vision or the seeing of it. Does that make sense? Another way to think about that is, sensation and perception. And perception is almost like a translation of the thing that you're seeing. And dyslexia almost exists in that translation of that symbol to sound connection. Okay, good question. Okay, so in reading, we have phonology, the sounds, the structure that is codified in written language. And then we have orthography, which is the symbols or the written form of language. And dyslexia is a limitation in the efficiency of that sound-symbol connection. We're going to be talking, I'm going to dig into the brain using kind of four main modules that are out there. We're going to start with some an old school study from the 1970s, a post-mortem dissection study, which is cool. We're going to look at magnetic resonance imaging, which is like a snapshot or a still photo of the brain, which allows us to look at anatomy. We're going to look at functional magnetic resonance imaging, or almost like a video model of like what brain regions are being activated during certain tasks. And then we're going to look at diffusion tensor imaging, which measures the integrity of the white matter tracts in the brain. So quick, hot thing, right? Gray matter and white matter, everybody's down, right? And the gray matter of the brain is like Wisconsin and Minnesota, and the white matter is like 94, right? So the white matter is like the highways that connect the parts of the regions of the brain and allows them to communicate with each other. So brain function, it used to be thought was related to like these pockets of the brain that were like doing different things, and we now know that it's that and this what's called connectivity or network, a network model of the brain. So gray matter and white matter is what we're going to be looking at, okay? All right, so way back in the day, this guy named Norm Geschwind was a neurologist at Harvard who talked about his whole shtick was the association area of association areas, and he was describing this area in the brain in the left temporal parietal cortex called the angular gyrus that is kind of like the hub of all these different functions in the brain, okay? And the idea is that when a white matter tract is used over and over again to send messages from different parts of the brain, and when those gray matter areas get activated a lot, they grow, okay? And something that's true about most human brains is that because we, as this species that evolved to use a lot of language, that most human brains have parts of the left hemisphere, which is the language hemisphere, that are bigger than the right. okay? So we see what's called an asymmetry, where the left areas of the left hemisphere are larger than the right hemisphere. And Geschwin's student, Albert Galiberta, in 1979 did a post-mortem anatomical dissection study of multiple brains of people who had had dyslexia and measured the absence of that typical left-right asymmetry in this area called the planum temporale, which is well known to be an area that's associated with auditory language processing, okay? So that was kind of like the first window into brain anatomy differences in dyslexia. Are you with me? I kind of threw a lot at you there, okay? But don't worry, because I'm going to like circle back to some of those principles that I was talking about too. Okay, so this is just like a schematic kind of a thing. But the areas of the brain that we're talking about today are the occipital cortex, this pinkish area, and then the angular gyrus and the medial temporal, superior temporal gyrus. So these kind of blue areas, okay? So this is looking at the brain from the left side. So we're talking about an area here and an area right behind the left ear. Chill? Cool? Okay. You can tell first off that these two areas are not adjacent to each other, right? Orthography, the symbol processing happens back here. The sound processing happens here. So in order for reading to happen, these two areas of the brain have to communicate with each other at lightning speed, but they're not, because they're not adjacent to each other, they're connected by a rope of fibers. Yeah, it's Chris. All right, so there's a part in the back left of the brain that processes the letter symbols, which are lines on the page that we call letters, and then there's a part behind the left ear that processes the sounds that are associated with those symbols. Those two parts of the brain are not right next to each other. And so in order to communicate, they send messages through this rope of fibers. Okay? That rope of fibers is called a white matter tract. Okay? And this is like a really cool visual image. Isn't that cool? Of the white matter tracts in the brain that connect these areas, okay? By the way, that rope of, I've held it in my hand in a brain anatomy class. It's like literally, it's like angel hair pasta. No, I'm serious. They're actual like legit things that physically, and so it's this rope of fibers. Now, are you with me in that? That's reading? In the brains of people with dyslexia, that rope of fibers is thinner and more frayed. Frayed. And I'm going to give away something that's really cool, which we'll talk about in more detail, which is that difference, the thinness of the rope of fibers, is now visualizable, present in 18-month-old babies. Legit. And I'm going to talk to you about why and how that happens and what genetics has to do about that. But question first.
So the occipital,
yeah.
The neurological, so the occipital, letter symbol occipital portion is not connected to the what part?
To the temporal lobe, the lateral temporal cortex. Yep. Via this white matter tract. Okay, everybody's with me? Okay. This is just another cool image of it, kind of 3D image, this kind of arcuate fasciculus, and you can see there's lots of different white matter tracts doing lots of different things, by the way. This is all relevant also to ADHD stuff, and it's all related to each other, and this is how the brain communicates. Okay, so that was like the intro into diffusion tensor imaging. We're going to come back to stuff like that. I'm going to transition us a little bit now. So we've done anatomy, the dissection of the post-mortem, right? We've looked at kind of the gray matter, white matter stuff. and we've done DTI, and now we're going to functional magnetic resonant imaging, okay? And the way to look at this is that they're having people do reading tasks. People with dyslexia do reading tasks, and they're measuring what the brain is doing in terms of phonological processing and rapid automatic naming. You guys have heard of the double deficit hypothesis before? Yeah. Good. It's almost 100% nods. So double deficit, phonological processing, rapid automatic naming. This is an fMRI study demonstrating that those two things happen in two different places, which is what I just said. You know what I mean? But it's just another way of looking at it, almost like live in real time, kind of video imaging a little bit. And this study, interestingly, also, so people with dyslexia can have a primary phonological processing deficit, a primary rapid naming deficit, or both. Okay, and I see it in my practice all day long. Okay, it's interesting, and there's a group out of UCSF that's looking into some of the genetic differences between those presentations, or among those presentations. But what this study found back in 2014 is that those who have both deficits struggle more, greater reading impairments than those with a single deficit. Okay. This is a study out of Stanford University from 2011. So this is a little bit of, I had to say in my talk that dyslexia has nothing to do with IQ. Okay, cool, right? This study showed they had a group struggling readers in the study, okay, and they had a group of struggling readers who had high IQ and a group who had low IQ, and they kind of dichotomized the group. They kind of used this cut point for like kind of what was high and what was low and whatever. And the big question was, are their brains doing different things while reading? Like, is the brain showing different anomalies while reading? And the answer was a clear no. So both groups showed the reduced activation of the left, this says left parietal occipital temporal activation, regardless of IQ. Okay, so we know that dyslexia is not related to IQ. Okay, and in fact, sometimes there's like an inverse relationship between reading and IQ, right? Not always, but sometimes. The brain differences are the same. Okay, you're with me? Hanging in? Okay. I want to talk about letter reversals in a way that is going to piggyback off what we've just established. Are you with me? So that back left occipital part of the brain is originally designed to process objects or shapes, right? And before, and letters are just like lines on a page. You know what I mean? Like if you imagine yourself never having seen the English alphabet, or like I lived in Cairo for a summer and I had never seen like the Arabic alphabet when I was 18 years old, and it was like, oh wow, that's such a beautiful design, you know? So can you kind of imagine in your head what that might be like? Yeah, okay. So before letters are connected to their sound, which is their meaning, they're not yet a symbol. Yeah? A symbol is a shape or an object that has an automatic connection with its meaning, okay? So before letters are automatically connected with their meaning, they're not a symbol yet, okay? And as we know, built-in wiring difference in the brains of people with dyslexia, that sound symbol association automaticity develops at a slower rate. I said that really fast, but you're with me, right? Okay. So you got a young kid, so you got a young kid, dyslexic or not, and they see a B, okay, and then they see a D. And before that shape or object is a symbol, the brain processes it like it was an object. And the brain, all human brains, have this built-in, very cool, handy feature in the object recognition cortex called automatic mirror reversal, right? And I don't know if this is gonna, I always like say this one, but I don't think people really get it, but I think it's so funny. But like, it's like if you think about back in the day and like you're like hunting like a buffalo or whatever, running away from it, I don't know, and it's coming at you from the east or the west, you gotta know it's a buffalo like instantaneously. You don't gotta be like, now hold up. You know what I mean? Or if you see a chair in different directions, there's not, and so this is why I have this crows painting in my office, because not for a millisecond does your brain look at that guy and go, now, is that a crow? Right? All right? So that's exactly what the brain is supposed to do with objects. It's supposed to take them and bam, reverse them. Very fluid, okay? And before letters become symbols, they're objects or crows or buffaloes or chairs, right? And a B and a D, this is a B and this is a D. So the young brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is being fluid with letters, okay? Then in the dyslexic brain, because it takes longer to get that sound symbol association down, the brain is still doing what it's supposed to do with that shape, which is reverse it, which is why those letter reversals persist, because they're not yet processed as symbols. Okay? Cool? Good. Okay. Yeah.
Why does the brain reverse it in the first place?
That's my buffalo thing that I always, thanks for asking. So because we from an evolutionary perspective, we have to be able to know what objects are, no matter what orientation they are, we're seeing them at. Oh yeah, hi Jane. The question was, why does the brain do that automatic mirror reversal thing? And so from an evolutionary perspective, in order to like survive, we have to be really, really proficient at interpreting objects regardless of their orientation. Okay. Does that make sense? Did that land?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. We can talk later.
The way the buffalo was moving.
Legit. Yep.
So if it was
The,
reversing, it would be working in the opposite direction. So that doesn't make any sense.
you gotta just know it's a buffalo. Yeah.
And then there's something else that tells you where.
Yeah.
The perception.
Yeah. So it's if you can tell that a thing is a thing, no matter what direction it's facing in, that's kind of the point. Okay? We can talk later. I appreciate the questions on this stuff. Okay, here's another cool thing, which is orthographic mapping. Okay, so so there's this automaticity thing that happens with the individual letter processing, and then there's this automaticity thing that happens with word processing, such that when, as proficient readers, when we open up the newspaper, we're not like decoding every single word, right? You just kind of look at it and you kind of know the word, right? And the reason for that is because the brain has this area, also in the left occipital lobe, called the visual word form area. Okay, and the visual word form area is like a bank that stores word forms. There's so much to say about this, but I'm going to be brief because I really want to get to the genetics piece. But the bottom line is that the only way that words get stored in that visual word form area is through orthographic mapping, or if they're sounded out. Okay, they don't get stored there by memorization. And they don't get stored there by recognition of the shape of the word, right? They get stored there by orthographic mapping. So mapping the orthography or the symbol, okay, to the sound, and then eventually its meaning. Cool? Okay. Oh yeah, and our good colleague Stanislas Dehaene in France has really good deep level stuff on this if you want to read more about that. Okay, so let's talk about genetics. We got 12 minutes, okay? Here we go. So here is the story, basically, The heritability factor for dyslexia ranges, depending on what study you read, from 0.4 to 0.7. A heritability factor basically describes the amount of statistical variance that's described by something, in this case, genetics. Okay? Another way to think about that is in most people with dyslexia, come by it honestly. That's another way to think about that. You with me? Okay?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Cool, thank you. Meaning, about 40 to 70% of the variance or like the reason that this thing happened is related to genetics. Okay, and so this is just one of many studies, but in 2022, Nature Genetics, so like this field is like blossoming right now, but they had a pool of over 1 million participants in their study. 51,000 of them were adults with dyslexia, and this study identified 27 genes that were specific to dyslexia, and then 6 or 7, I forget, I read it again this morning, but I forget, 6 or 7 specific genes that like could actually like predict dyslexia, and so this is getting us closer to at least one aspect of possible earlier identification of dyslexia. I'm going to go on because it's going to get clearer as we go on. Okay, I'm going to explain like why this is. So another way to look at this is when a parent has dyslexia, the chances that an offspring has dyslexia is about 50%, give or take. And it also goes the other way. So, you know, chances of a parent having dyslexia when the kid has dyslexia, which I'm saying that is important because that's most often the case in the time and space that we're living now. The kid is the one who's going to get identified, and the parent's like, hey man, that apple did not fall far. You know what I mean? Or the parents like watching over the shoulder where they're doing the OG tutoring going like, no way. Right? So anyways, and then the risk is increased when other family members are affected, and there's a 3 to 10-fold increase in relative risk if a sibling has dyslexia. So those are just kind of some numbers around the fact that genetics is a big part of this. Why? Oh, first, sorry. We'll get to why in a second. But I mean, I want to mention this. The UCSF, so a group at UCSF has this like great research program, and they have a very like interesting like non-academic website that's really accessible, but they're doing some studies looking at the different genetic differences between the phonological processing and rapid automatic naming, kind of subtypes of dyslexia. They're not really subtypes yet, but they will be someday. So if you're interested in that, you can see more. So here's why. Here's how genes shape the brain. So this is why dyslexia is genetic. So genes have this coding thing that they do that tells neurons where to go. And so when the human brain is developing, it's developing because neurons are migrating or moving. They're proliferating, they're creating more of themselves, and then they're pruning themselves. So they kind of like, it's almost this expansion and contraction and direction thing that's happening as the human brain is developing, right? And genes determine where those neurons are going to migrate to or go, okay? Where neurons go and how they travel in groups ends up making collections of neurons that are either big or small. You can have a big collection of neurons or a small collection of neurons. They can have rich connections between each other or sparse connections between each other. There can be a dense grouping of neurons or a sparse or less dense grouping of neurons, okay? And depending on how neurons migrate, then there's a stronger or weaker organization among them. And then the bigger the group of neurons and the richer the connection, the better that area functions, okay? Does this make sense? I wanted to like put this in plain language. Yeah? So this goes all the way back to Galiberta's post-mortem study. That's why the left planum temporale is bigger in most brains. It also goes back to this whole white matter gig, right? Because the genetic difference, the neurons don't migrate in a way that is as organized or tightly held together in that arcuate fasciculus, that white matter tract, and that's why it's thinner. Cool? Oops. So, and then let me just show this here. So this is literally, I did this at 4 o'clock this morning because I was like, oh my gosh, this is how we do it. But this is not dyslexia specific, but I wanted to get an image up here for you of the kind of schematic of neuronal migration. This is the frontal lobe, but you can see here how there are like collections of neurons, and you can't see this maybe from where you're sitting, but the schematic is showing arrows. And you can see the breakout here of like kind of where they're going, and they're kind of collecting, and then they're sparse out here, right? And so you can see how that could happen in a brain where it depends where they go and how they go and who they go with, that creates this abnormal gray matter and white matter. Yes?
Does it get affected by like an interest, like if they're hyper-focused on something?
That's a really cool question. Neuronal migration, no. But white matter tract development is pretty plastic, like longer than we used to think it was. And so we can see white matter tracts get thicker with structural literacy, by the way, which I'm going to show you in a slide. We can also see white matter tracts get thicker when someone becomes like proficient in playing an instrument, stuff like that. And white matter tracts also get thicker when ADHD is treated. You know what I mean? So it's this whole idea. Donald Hebb, Canadian neurologist, his shtick was neurons that fire together, wire together. You guys have heard of that before? And that's kind of that whole concept that addresses your question of using it more and how that creates thicker tracts. Cool? Okay, so this is the Gab lab out of Harvard, led by Nadine Gab. I mentioned that study that shows that thinner white matter tract is present in 18-month-old babies. So the babies, by the way, there's a group of babies that have a family history of dyslexia and a group of babies that don't have a family history of dyslexia. Okay, and these guys have a thinner white matter tract. They're pre-readers, 18 months. Which isn't that like monumental when you think about explaining this to a kid or someone who's living with dyslexia? Bro, your brain is wired this way. It's like, anyways, I just feel like it's a great window into a compassionate, neutral awareness of the biology of this condition. Has nothing to do with IQ and effort and all that stuff. Okay. And so anyways, these are the DTI images showing family history of dyslexia, family history without dyslexia, thinner tracts here. Same study. Another study showing, this is cool actually, this is an MRI study that, remember the 1979 study with the absence of the asymmetry in the planum temporale? This MRI study kind of replicated that and found that, this atypical structural asymmetry is related to having a family history of dyslexia. So you see the anatomy differences even with the family history, so even in pre-readers again. And then just to say that this is across lots of different modalities, we're also seeing this in functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, that pre-readers are also showing that decreased activation in the left temporal occipital lobe. All right, cool. Just a few minutes, but I want to make sure that I say this, okay? Because this like kind of brings it into reality. How to talk to your kid about their new dyslexia diagnosis. 4-part process. 1, I see that reading is hard for you. Name the struggle and separate the person from the challenge. I see that reading is hard for you. I know that you're doing your best. Unfortunately, oftentimes the implicit message is, hey, you know what, if you just tried a little bit harder, you really could just get it, right? And it's well-intentioned, but kids need to know that they're already maxed out doing their best. And what we learned is that your brain is wired in a way that means we need to teach you reading in a different way. Hey-oh, right? Okay? And soon reading will be a lot easier for you. Okay? So I buzzed through that. There's a lot more to say on that, but you get it? Okay. I'm not even going to talk about that stuff because you guys will get that further, but I just want to make sure in the final 2 minutes that I show you these slides of how effective intervention builds the actual reading circuits in the brain. So pre and post studies, pre-Orton-Gillingham post studies show changes in the white matter tracts, a thickening, and they show increased integrity. Remember I said like that frayed rope? So if you imagine a rope that's frayed, the fibers kind of come together. So increased thickness and increased integrity. And then that's also shown in other kind of more functional imaging studies. So this is one where kids had 8 to 10-year-old kids had 100 hours of intensive remedial instruction, and they showed an increase in fractional anisotropy is the measurement that DTI uses to describe how thick that fiber is and how easily water passes through it. So how intact it is. Okay, so anyways, the take-home point on this is that there are identifiable visual brain differences that happen when people with dyslexia learn how to read in the way that works for their brains. Cool? Okay, it's 11:29. Does anyone have any quick questions? I am around for questions afterwards too.
Another 15 minutes.
No, do I really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Do you know what? This is not the first time I've done this in a talk before, which is great because I have more material.
People want to hear more.
Okay, good. This is great. That's a fun.
Because it might get noisy out there. We don't
Oh my gosh. Okay, you know what? This is like one of my, you got your strong points and your weak points and time management. Anyways, well, this is great. So, I'm going to talk then more about the intervention, kind of how to support kids with dyslexia and some of the psychology behind it, which is kind of fun. But let me just take any questions on the brain stuff. Yeah.
Just kind of related, but I really specifically have a child, she's a teenager, but struggles with that her brain is different or disordered.
Yeah.
I go over the anatomy and the wiring and blah, 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 but she's like, but you're not good at art, so are you disordered?
I love
I can't draw
this.
anything. She's like, why am I called disordered? Just because they can't teach me the way I learn. So I struggle with that with her. She keeps circling.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I'm not disordered, it's just my brain.
Please tell her thank you from me. I'm not even kidding you. Yes, I will give a synopsis. Yep. So, talking about a teenage girl who has this question of, is my brain disordered? Why do we have to say my brain is disordered because I can't read? Hey, Mom, you're not that great at art. Are you disordered? Yeah. Okay, this is so cool. So the basic bottom line is we have to use kind of the semantics that we have to use, right? And there's a clinical term called specific learning disorder, and the school system still calls it a learning disability. And like if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of those words, I absolutely 1000% would. And what I do is call it a difference. It's a learning difference. True. And you get that on a deeper level when I say this, right? Because the learning difference is a little bit of a nice way to say it. No, it's not just a nice way to say it. It's actually true. This brain is wired in a different way. Okay, ready? Remember Marianne Wolf, cultural invention like reading? This brain is wired in a way that makes it so that this brain doesn't necessarily quite as quickly pick up on y'all's cultural invention, but it often picks up quicker on other stuff that sadly is not emphasized in our current school system. Remember fish and water, you guys, right? Fish and water, we're like in this weird world where it's like reading and writing is like everything. What about building? What about systems? What about relationships? What about art, creativity, right? So we're in this like kind of weird, like drank the Kool-Aid stage of history right now in terms of dyslexia, because we kind of culturally think that if you can't read, you're like weaker, or your brain is weaker, right? But actually, it's just a different brain. I like to think about like also like a mismatch between that brain and the system that it lives in. And oftentimes I'll say to kids, which is actually like, man, I wish this was the case. And if anybody knows any engineers who want to partner with me on this, let me know. But don't you wish that like dyslexic engineers, architects, astrophysicists, etc., could like develop a curriculum on how they wished they could have learned in like second grade? Bro, because you get these people who kind of survive through the education system. I mean, holy cow. And then they go to MIT and they're like, well, shit, okay, you know, right? If they're lucky enough to get there. Side note about culture, I mean, there's just so much to say about what happens when kids don't do well in school and all that, okay? But anyways, what if we could do the MIT thing in second grade and teach your daughter's brain, client, thank you, sorry, okay, in a way that resonated with her now, yeah.
I love what you're saying, this difference disorder thing, I think is excellent. And one other frame on that same thing, as I was saying, I'm surely dyslexic, but I don't say I have dyslexia.
Yeah.
I really, when you say you have something, you have a disease, you can have cancer, you can have, I don't say I have it, because I'm not getting rid of it. I am. And people often emphasize the have as if they're being kind, but I just would encourage, with you having set that up, I think that's something for people to think about. So I think you don't have left-handedness, you are.
Yes.
Right? You don't have gayness or straightness.
Yes,
you are.
yes, yes.
You don't have dyslexia, you are.
Yes, thank you. And the Brits get that. One of my favorite books to recommend to families is called The Amazing Picture Book of Dyslexics and the Jobs They Do. You know, Americans are more like, our version of PC has to kind of like be like, oh, you have this thing, but it's not that. It's a built-in aspect of that person that influences how they see the world. Yeah, 100%. What the question is, what's the earliest age that you assess a child for dyslexia? There's a little bit of nuance to this. Technically speaking, in our kind of manual that we use for diagnoses, the DSM, an individual has to have had substantial reading instruction, and we usually kind of like interpret that as like a year of reading instruction in order to make a diagnosis of dyslexia, a clinical diagnosis of dyslexia, okay? That's like the system that we're working in now. As you can tell, someday down the road, there's going to be other ways of diagnosing dyslexia at a very much earlier time, right? But the system that we work in now, the diagnosis requires having had about a year of instruction. So that kind of puts us to like usually end of first grade to establish a clinical diagnosis, because I got to follow the rules of my book, right? However, we can reliably measure those underlying cognitive mechanics of reading, the phonological processing and rapid automatic naming, down to age 4. Okay, and so you know, and we can kind of piece things together. If there's a family history of dyslexia and they're showing early difficulties with letter recognition and letter sound associations and rhyming, and then we measure deficits, like statistically significant deficits in phonological processing, rapid automatic naming, I can't say clinically it's dyslexia, but I can say it sure looks like it might be a dyslexia. Let's get started on teaching that brain reading the way it needs to learn. Make sense? Thanks. Okay, cool. Yes.
Are there parameters that you put around diagnosing someone with a different language as being dyslexic?
Oh, good question. So the question, I'm going to repeat it, but then I want to make sure I understand. Are there parameters that you put around diagnosing someone with a different language as being dyslexic? Are you talking about like immersion education or someone who is speaking a second language?
Someone has a second language, but also is learning English. So not necessarily English, a secondary, not someone who's come over and maybe they speak Somali or Spanish and they're learning English for the first time, but let's say they've been here a while in the English school.
Yeah.
They've been here since kindergarten.
Yeah.
Yet you're trying to figure out, does this child have
Yeah.
dyslexia?
Yeah, good question. It's a good question. It's a hard one to answer, I'm going to be honest. You know what I mean? It's a murky area. But what I can say is that, again, usually rough estimate of like a year or two or at least some time. Definitely measuring dyslexia in English requires fluency in the English language. Like
Is that defined by
oral language,
years
oral
of being
language.
exposed to it, or how fluent?
how fluently they process the language. But that's like the oral language, thank you. Talking about the written language and that kind of, the reading aspect of things, then we have to see the adequate instruction. You get what I'm saying? So it's like this kind of two things have to be there in order to be able to identify it, okay? And there's a lot of like gray area around that. Yes?
Is there a way that you can use if they're a reader or writer in their home language?
Yeah.
Use that to support.
Yeah, if you can, I mean, the ideal thing would be to assess in the primary, their first language. Yep, totally. Yes.
What was the other thing you said at age 4? You see early differences. Is it phonological processing, or what was the other?
Oh, rapid automatic naming. Yep. And that's like the efficiency of the symbol processing part of things. Cool. I just am still on this question about the learning difference thing because I just want to say one more thing on that. Okay, you ready? This is cool. So, which actually like I have some slides on this, which I'm going to show because they're here. So this is, by the way, the Pompidou Museum in Paris, and if you guys have never been there, you should go. It's like, it's one of the best. The bro who designed this, the architect, is dyslexic, and talk about, this is my favorite thing, think outside the box. Hey-o, right? Yeah, so he's like put the escalator on the outside. It's the coolest thing. Inside out, an inside out museum. Anyways, okay. But, here's the deal. So in terms of, I'm going to go a little bit deeper on this learning differences thing to tie it back to the whole brain science aspect of things, which is another thing we know about dyslexic brains, which I haven't mentioned today, is this. In typical readers, when we're measuring activation in the brain, the left hemisphere lights up a lot and the right hemisphere lights up only a little, if any. In dyslexic readers, the right hemisphere lights up a lot. Okay? So the right hemisphere is more active during reading tasks in dyslexic brains. Why? It's chicken and the egg right now because we don't know exactly, okay? But the one mindset or theory on that can help to explain why there's lots of artists, engineers, architects, people who are really, really good at like visualizing things which is that the dyslexic brain, it has like an overdeveloped right hemisphere. Which takes us back to slide 1 of the absence of the left-right asymmetry in the planum temporale, right? So are you with me? So yeah, your brain is disordered because you're not good at art. That's the answer. You know what I mean? You can be like, listen, if we're going to call dyslexic brain disordered, then we're going to call because you can't do art, and me neither. So me and you. Yep. So right. So that's kind of that. And I'm going to do one more thing on that, but go ahead. Yep.
This might be too big.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No.
It's okay.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Go ahead.
So then, does the right side of the brain on a dyslexic person sometimes obviously look bigger? Is what you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
Look bigger and it is more active.
And with that same question, I get this question a lot, is like, is there, when they do these brain scans, is there kind of I don't know if this is the right word to say, but spectrum where some people it's more severe
Yeah.
than others?
100%. Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to repeat that for the, when they do brain scans, is there a spectrum where sometimes it's more severe than others? And yes, absolutely. This is a continuum, and that continuum that we see on brain imaging explains what we see in real life too, the continuum of severity, for sure, of this presentation. And I just want to make a quick comment. There's a really good book on this by this guy named Thomas West that is called Visual Thinkers. The Hidden Advantages of the Differently Wired Brain. Visual Thinkers, the Hidden Advantages of a Differently Wired Brain by Thomas West. And he talks about all this like right hemisphere stuff, which I'm going to get to one more slide on that. But yes, let me take this question first.
So my question was, are kids who have processing issues also in the same category, or is that like a separate, because it's RAN and
Yeah.
phonological, but then the processing stuff, being able to take in all that information, is that still dyslexia, or is that sort of like an option?
Oh my gosh. I have like another 2 hours so I can say that. It's so good question. The question is, yeah, I do. Come talk to my people. So, but yeah, how does dyslexia relate to these processing differences? I mean, there's just, yes. Okay, and we can go auditory, we can go visual, we can talk about the processing speed index on the WISC and what that entails and why that is oftentimes lower in people with dyslexia and why that doesn't mean that they're slow processors and why that set of tests should be renamed the symbol processing index, not the processing speed index, because dyslexic thinkers are not slow. Anyways, yeah, let's plan a talk, me and you. Okay, but I do have to show this slide because it's so good. Can I just take 2 more minutes, 1 more minute? Space scientists, so this is so cool. So on this topic of the visual, the right hemisphere, and kind of the dyslexic brain being really good at visualizing things. So this is Maggie Adderin-Pocock, and she's in London. She's an astrophysicist with this insane, amazing career, so look her up. And then both of these people have dyslexia, or are dyslexic, thank you. And then Lawrence Schneider is at MIT, and he has this great video, it's called From Struggling with Dyslexia to Working for NASA. But the thing I really wanted to show you is this study out of Harvard that documented, so it was Harvard students, so they're all like pretty smart, right? And they had students at Harvard who had a history of a reading struggle, and the students who didn't. And the students who had the history of reading struggle were better at identifying black holes. Isn't that cool? And the line in the article that I pulled out of here, he says, studies have shown that struggling readers outperform typical readers in some visual tasks that integrate distributed information across an expanse. Man, Right? So it's like that ability to see the larger whole, to understand systems in this like almost innate way, to see things differently than other people see them, and to process them in a more efficient way than people without dyslexia. Right? Okay.
Thank you for the extra
Thank you.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
A wonderful 45
Yeah.
minutes. The audience has joined me. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you guys.